person that bought our house called us and said, hey, the DNR is on your property. And I was like, well, what are they past the gate? And they're like, yeah.
I'd like to get a little testimony from Representative Mueller on his experience on his farm.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just, I mean, I've been in law enforcement for 19 years before I did this, so I am pro-law enforcement. I'm also pro property rights, and, I'm anti-government overreach. In this case, we had just sold our house, and we went up to get lunch, and our neighbor, or the person that bought our house, called us and said, hey, the DNR is on your property. And I was like, well, what are they past the gate? And they're like, yeah. And so we left our lunch. I drove down there, and sure enough, we have a gate because we have a wedding venue also out at our farm. And we had allowed some young men, because they're out hunting. They're in their mid-20s. I mean, they're out goose hunting on a weekend. So what would we rather have? Our kids out goose hunting on a weekend, or doing shrooms and mushrooms, or smoking weed and doing dumb things that kids do these days?
So just to paint the picture here, imagine that you're out for lunch and you just sold your home and you're trying to just have a quiet meal. And all of a sudden you get the phone call that people are on your property. And I'm pretty sure that would make everybody panic. He's been in law enforcement for nearly 2 decades, and he knows the rules. But when you ask, are they past the gate, and you hear yes, and think about that. It's a gate that we put up for a reason, and they're past that. And ordinarily, to normal people, that would be a boundary that you say, hey, this is private land, don't go past this gate. And why were they there? They were there to check some young men out goose hunting. Mueller asked a great question, and one I want to ask you. Would you have 20-year-olds hunting on a weekend on your property, or would you keep it to yourself? I do have to applaud him on giving the next generation a place to hunt. That's amazing.
So I drove up there, and I talked to the DNR officer, and I said, you're trespassing, you need to leave. And he was actually he was professional about it, but he was kind of surprised when I said that. And I said, we have a little bit of a difference of opinion on the open Fields Doctrine. I said, I understand that, you can come on here, but I don't see any exigent circumstance for you coming on to, mess with these young kids hunting. He said, well, I got a complaint that, they're hunting within 600 feet of a dwelling. And I said, well, you can stand on the road and clearly see they're not 600 feet from any dwelling. I said, any dwelling around here is on our property. And if you would have just came up and asked me about that, then you would have. He actually drove around my fence through a cornfield to go up there instead of just parking it and walk. If he would have just parked his vehicle and walked, I wouldn't really had a problem. I still don't think that the DNR can go on to your property. Exigent circumstances for hunting, come on, it's not like you're hiding a body out there, you're hunting, and I know that poaching and things is not legal.
So there's a detail here that I don't want it to be overlooked. The officer didn't just walk onto the land, he drove around a vehicle through a cornfield. Now, if you're a farmer, you know what a cornfield is, and it's your livelihood, it's your work, and it's your investment. Since when is it okay for a government agent to just drive through your crops because they have a complaint? Mueller also mentions the open Fields Doctrine as well. That basically says that the government can look around your land if it's not right next to your house. But Mueller points out something that should be common sense. They could have seen everything that they needed to see just from the road. They didn't need to drive through the crops, but they still chose to. And why? Is it about safety? Mueller even says that it's not like they were trying to hide a body. They were just out hunting. So ask yourself the question, if a DNR officer can ignore your fence, drive through your crops, and bypass your gate for something as simple as a hunting check, what can't they do? Where does the open field doctrine end and your life begin? Does that feel like protection to you, or does it kind of feel like something else?
But, at the end of it, I just basically said, here's my card, or here's my number. Call me if you have a problem and you want to come out on the property. I'll let you come out here. But the problem is just like when I was a police officer, there's certain calls I went on, like noise complaints and things like that, where I would drive by, roll my window down, and if I didn't think it was obnoxious, I wouldn't even make contact with the people. I'd just say it was unfounded and move on. And what I feel is they learn the letter of the law, but they don't, or the spirit of the law or letter of the law, but they don't use very much discretion. They're just told to do something, they do it. And then you need to have a little bit more discretion when it comes to their training on personal property rights, because they don't pay the taxes on that property, I do.
He says something that's pretty powerful. He says that they don't pay taxes on the property, I do. That's huge. That's a big sentence. It's a simple fact, but it's one that we don't hear often enough. You pay property taxes, you maintain the land, you take the risk, and yet the people who don't pay a cent for the land feel that they have more of a right to it than you to be there. Mueller talks about discretion. He was a cop. He knows that sometimes you see something, a noise complaint or a minor issue, and you realize that it's really not a problem. Sometimes you can just go up to the person and just have a real conversation about it, and that solves the problem. And then you move on. You let people live their lives. But it seems like the spirit of the law is slowly disappearing. And now it's about the letter of the law. It's about checking boxes. It's about making sure that every single person is following every single minute thing of the regulation at all times. I want to know your opinion on this. Let me know what you guys think about this so far. Do you agree with what they're saying? Can you see an argument for, what the DNR did? Let me know what you think about it.
And I allow the people that go out there to hunt. And like I said, I'd rather have these 20-year-old kids in the Fenton area out hunting than driving around doing, teenager things and stupid things that they do. So that was my experience with it. And the other thing is, and I think Rep. Vanderwall might be able to testify to this when it comes to like baiting and things like that, and over on the west side of the state. And we've been hearing a little bit of rumors about this too, is we also own a cider mill, and they want to, our pulp, after we make the cider, they want to say that that's industrial waste. So what's the difference after you squeeze the apples and you get juice out of them versus the apples that fall off the tree on our 100 acres of land that rot because you don't pick all the apples, and then they want you to do one more step and have to throw it into a dumpster that you have to pay for, so then you have to raise the prices in a business that's only open 2.5 months out of the year on a piece of property that my grandfather bought in 1941 for $5,000. So that's what I'm saying when it comes to the government coming in. And another issue, this is just when you talk about government overreach, we have the wedding venue on the property and an apple orchard. MDARD comes out, inspects the, the food or where we make the donuts and stuff, and said, "Oh, where's your food license for your wedding venue?" And I'm like, that's 600 feet up there and it doesn't have a kitchen. So now the government's making us get a food license for an establishment that doesn't even have a kitchen in it.
And this is where it gets a little surreal. The government wants to call the leftover apple pulp, the stuff that you squeeze after you squeeze an apple, industrial waste. Think about that for a second. An apple falls off of a tree in the woods and it's called nature. You squeeze that same apple in a machine and make juice for your neighbors, and the leftover is suddenly industrial waste. It's the same apple. It's the same dirt, but because a business is involved, it becomes a hazard, and that requires dumpsters and fees and regulations. And then there's the wedding venue, a building with no kitchen, and I just won't get into that because that doesn't really cover the DNR stuff of it, but I can understand his frustration points. But by all means, if you guys want to chime in and let me know what you think about the kitchen perspective, definitely let me know in the comments. All right, so we spent some time talking about a gate, a cornfield, some apples, and some pulp. It might seem like small stuff, but it's not. It's the biggest stuff out there. It's about the relationship between you, the person that owns the land, the hunter, and the DNR, which would be the government. And it's about whether private property is a real thing or if it's just a legal fiction that can be ignored whenever there's a conveniency for an agency. Representative Mueller is a former cop. He's a lawmaker, and even he's frustrated by this. If he feels that this is an overreach of his land, which his grandfather bought, where does that leave the rest of us? And again, I just want to say this just because it has to be said. Not all DNR officers are like this. I think that there are just a handful that spoil the whole bunch, and obviously they're going to get more attention than everything else. I'm sure that there's still great DNR officers out there, and they actually care, and they want to make a difference, and they know that just giving ticket after ticket after ticket isn't the way to do that. So I just want to put that out there. But it is worth mentioning that these things are happening and they do need to be talked about. And, again, the whole point of this video is just to spread awareness so that everybody knows what's going on. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think, and I'll catch you in the next one.